there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we are going to deep dive onto the 2025 NBA draft prospects a bit more, specifically focusing on the college prospects in today's video as we look at some data charts that I have made and put a lot of effort into to kind of visually showcase some data for these prospects. I spend a lot of time, of course, analyzing the players, not only watching film, but then also studying the data, the analytics, advanced numbers, all of that stuff. And I wanted to visualize it for you all today to best help you understand the college prospects in this year's draft. If you do enjoy all of the hard work that I put in, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And as a quick little precursor here, you can see there's a lot of work that goes into this, a lot of manual inputting of stats. Of course, Sports Reference is a huge help for this when it comes to finding the numbers, finding the data. You can tell I kind of charted a lot of different players. I have 36 prospects specifically in this year's draft that we're going to talk about. If you want a closer look at any of the data charts that you see in today's video, they will be up on the Utility Sports Twitter @_Utility Sports over on X. Link is in the description as well if you're looking for an easier way to get over to that. But let's jump back over to the data now and move down to our very first graph. And it is a 3-point attempt rate graph versus 3-point percentage. And the size of the bubble represents the raw 3-point attempts per game. So for example, you look at someone like Khaman Maluach down here, you can tell his 3-point attempt rate wasn't very high. Just about 8% of his total shots this season were 3-pointers for Duke. And his overall 3-point attempt per game volume was incredibly low, just 0.4 3-point attempts per game, which is why the dot down here is so small. And as you can tell, he shot 25% on threes this past season. So he wasn't super productive or boasting a high volume, whether it was just raw 3-point attempts per game or 3-point attempt rate, which I think is a better stat to look at anyway, which is why I have that charted here on the vertical axis. And then of course on the x-axis you have that 3-point percentage. So the further left, the less efficient you were. That's someone like Thomas Sorber. I know a lot of people are hopeful about his offensive game and skill set. Well, he connected on just 16% of his threes, and that was about 15% of his shot diet this past year at Georgetown. So a little bit less than 1 in every 6 shots was a 3-pointer for him, and he didn't make a whole ton of them. So it is a little bit of a concern for me. But, someone I am high on, Derik Queen, shot even less threes by volume than Thomas Sorber, who took about 1.5 threes a game. Derik Queen shot just 1 3-pointer a game, only connected on 20% of them. Now, I do think there are substantive differences between those two guys as prospects outside of just the 3-point volume. Of course, there is no singular graph that's going to give you a great picture. Now, we do have 9 graphs to talk about in this video. And there's a lot of different players that stand out. Adou Thiero, a guy who, again, low 3-point success rate. I think these graphs are very helpful in terms of kind of painting some of the college prospects against each other. And remember the size of the bubble representing that 3-point attempts per game again. Maxime Raynaud, obviously a player who has risen on a lot of people's boards over the last 2 months or so as we got further and further through the draft cycle. And I think this is one of the charts that really shows a lot of growth for him from where he was his first 3 seasons in college basketball to this most recent year. This is, of course, just from the most recent season. This is data from the last season of college basketball that all of these guys played. Maxime Raynaud, 34% 3-point success rate. And a 34% 3-point attempt rate. So very similar numbers there across the board. Look at Egor Demin. This is kind of a polarizing prospect for a lot of reasons. He stands out to me in this chart because he's fairly far left in terms of his success rate not being very high. Made just 27.3% of his threes this past year for BYU. But over half of his field goal attempts were threes. Over 50% of his shots were 3-pointers, which is, I think, pretty alarming and I think is a stemming issue from his ability to handle the ball in traffic and his early dribble pickups, especially in the pick and roll. When he does get hedged out onto or blitzed, he just has a tendency to pick up his dribble, and then it kind of stunts his volume downhill as a rim attacker. Of course, when he does actually drive the ball, you're going to get a lot of kickouts. So 3-point attempt rate isn't fully indicative of what a prospect is in terms of where he's getting to on the court. Egor Demin, of course, can weaponize his passing vision quite well when he does drive the basketball, something he does better than when he's just standing out on the perimeter. But over half of his shots were still threes, and he didn't make a whole bunch of them. So I do think that's a bit concerning. Then you look down here, a guy like Collin Murray-Boyles. This is where, again, you look at how he shot in the NBA Combine drills. Very low three-point attempt rate, just 10% of his total shots were threes, and he didn't make a whole bunch of them, just 26.5%. The further left you are on the graphic, the worse, and you don't want to be so far low like Derik Queen, Thomas Sorber, Adou Thiero, Collin Murray-Boyles, Khaman Maluach, because these guys, they're just not attempting a ton of threes. Like, even look at Johni Broome, who shot more threes than, even Maluach and Murray-Boyles combined, or shot more threes almost than Murray-Boyles and Thiero combined, which, Johni Broome, obviously a high-volume player in college, but it's still one of those, his three-point attempt rate's really not that high, all things considered, because of how many shots he took. But it is still kind of a concern when you see guys this low in the three-point attempt rate column. Another guy that I want to talk about, Jeremiah Fears, made just 28.4% of his threes this past season. Now he did shoot almost 4 of them a game, so he's fairly high up in terms of the actual three-point attempt rate. 32.3% of his total shots were three-point attempts this year, but he didn't connect on a whole bunch of them, and that's where you get like kind of a differentiation point between even a guy like Kasparas Jakucionis, who made 3% more of his threes this past year. Very comparable to Egor Demin, though, in terms of the three-point attempt rate. One of the issues I have with Jakucionis as a prospect is his ability to win in isolation. I don't think his handle is electric enough. I don't think his first step skills are good enough to be a go-to offensive scorer. He's going to primarily score out of ball screen action. He's very reliant on ball screens, I think, all things considered. McNeeley didn't shoot the ball very well this year. Very high three-point attempt rate for him as well. But then you get into some of the farther prospects, and one guy that you guys know I'm trying to spread the propaganda on, that is Koby Brea. Made over 43% of his threes this past year and had a stunning 68.4% three-point attempt rate. You go back a year prior, which I don't have the data for on this graph, but if you look back at Koby Brea many, many moons ago when he was still playing for Dayton the season before this past one, he had a 70% true shooting, and he shot 48% on threes in the A10. It was incredible. It was an incredible season. Koby Brea, I think, built on that season with a very, very good year for Kentucky in the SEC. He is the outlier shooter in this draft. You look at just how high up he is on this chart in terms of the volume. This is a very projectable movement shooter in the NBA, someone who I'm very, very optimistic about going forward, even comparatively to someone like Chaz Lanier, who shot the ball very, very well this year for Tennessee and shot the ball a lot off of movement too. There's still a substantive difference between him and Koby Brea when it comes to the volume. Carter Bryant, I think, is an interesting one. Almost 60% of his total shots were three-pointers, a majority of those catch-and-shoot opportunities. This is why a player like him is a very projectable fit into an offense, even with a low usage rate, just 16% usage rate this past year. For Arizona, I think it's an exciting player to talk about. I do have to issue a little bit of caution here with the Cedric Coward numbers throughout this entire video. I included him in the sample data here, but he only had 6 games played this past season for Washington State. So you could arguably look at some of his numbers as outliers just because the sample size is very, very low for him. Sion James is the guy I want to highlight here too. 41.3% three-point success rate this past year, and 34.6% of his total shots were three-pointers. I think if there's a player in this draft who's going to closely mirror Terrence Mann in his NBA career, Sion James is that guy. Terrence Mann, of course, was a huge success story as a second-round pick for the Clippers. Really found a lot of love there before being traded to Atlanta this past season, and has worked out in a big way as a second-round pick. I think Sion James could return similar value in this year's draft class as a very toolsy point-of-attack defender. I also want to highlight Mark Sears. Very high volume of three-point attempts per game, over 7 3 balls attempted per night, and he shot 34.5% from 3. That's actually a pretty disappointing number for him compared to the year prior, where he made around 40% of his total three-point attempts. So three-point attempt rate's quite high. A lot of dribble pull-ups, a lot of mid-range game that he can work in off of that, but with him attempting such a high volume of threes this year, and yes, the three-point percentage dipped a little bit as a result, he is still a player that I think has been grossly undervalued throughout this process a bit. Drake Powell, another low-usage player, very comparable, even lower usage than Carter Bryant even, but made 38% of his threes. About 45% of his total shots were three-pointers, and he shot 2.6 threes a game. So pretty inspiring numbers there. Tre Johnson, another very high three-point attempt rate player. We'll talk about his two-point efficiency in a little bit here, but made 39.7% of his threes. I think this is an interesting chart. Again, if you want any more visual data on these charts, if you want to download them, use them for your own good, you can do so over on the Utility Sports Twitter. Let's jump into the 2-point volume versus efficiency here, and I have these color-coded. The players who I have classified as big men in this year's draft are in the white bubbles, wings and forwards are the blue bubbles, and then guards are the yellow bubbles. 2-point volume versus efficiency. So on the left here, the higher up you are, the more 2-pointers you shot per game. The further you are to the right, the more efficient you were on them. And then the overall size of the bubble represents how many points per game you scored. So kind of gives you another idea of the overall volume in scoring success throughout the course of the season. For example, Khaman Maluach, you look at him, didn't score a ton, only 8.6 points per game this year, but he was incredibly efficient. 75.4% on 2-pointers. He was the clear outlier in this class when it came to efficiency on twos, and a lot of those, of course, were stemming from lob dunks and playing out of the roll, catching really deep in the post. Like, very, very easy shot volume for him, and something that's going to project pretty well for him moving forward. Ryan Kalkbrenner is the outlier in terms of volume. If you look at how high up on this chart he is and how far right he is, that's what makes him really incredibly impressive. On the season, shot over 10 2-pointers a game and made almost 71% of them for Creighton on 19.2 points per game. There's a lot of Ryan Kalkbrenner fans. If you run into analytic-based scouting, people who look at the numbers a lot, which is something I do, but of course I balance that with a ton of film. For people just looking at numbers, Ryan Kalkbrenner is going to look like a lottery pick in a lot of ways because he had a very, very, very productive season for Creighton. Now, there's questions about level of competition, about his play age, which we'll talk about draft age very soon here too. In a few graphs, I have a graph based on that as well. But this is where, if you're a Ryan Kalkbrenner fan, you're going to have a lot of love. Collin Murray-Boyles, very good 2-point volume here as well. Shot over 62% on twos. Really good volume in terms of the amount of attempts per game. Very, very good. And then Rasheer Fleming, a player here who I think is pretty interesting to talk about, and Grant Nelson. These two guys basically had the exact same numbers this year. Now, Nelson scored a considerable less amount of points per game, but he also played less minutes than Rasheer Fleming, and he also played in a context where Fleming was the number one play finisher option for St. Joseph's, whereas Grant Nelson was kind of a fit piece into a litany of options for Alabama. So, you know, the points per game doesn't really matter too much to me, but they had very similar efficiency and volume on 2-pointers. Adou Thiero, a guy who I have very high on my draft board this year, made over 60% of his 2-pointers. Yes, right now he doesn't really have a sizable 3-point shot to rely on, which we talked about in the last graph. But 15 points per game, almost 8 2-point attempts per game. He also has a very, very high free throw rate, which we'll talk about a little bit later too, which has me really excited. One guy I need to talk about here, Dylan Harper. Made over 57% of his twos this past year, and of course a lot of that stems from his ability to get downhill with his handle, whether it's rejecting ball screens, splitting in the pick and roll, winning in isolation, playing balanced off of 2 feet. And I think there's a lot of room for him to grow yet as a finisher with more deceleration, more variance in the way that he gathers the basketball when driving to the hoop. So right now Harper has a very good track record of success as a rim finisher. And I think, you know, the comps to James Harden, Cade Cunningham, may be a little rich. I'm not sure if he's going to be that level of player, especially Harden as a scorer and Cade Cunningham as an all-around player. And Harper is just a little bit smaller than Cade too, which I think is going to be a pretty substantive difference once they get into the NBA. And, you know, you're just looking at the two of them. They are different players. But I think all things considered here for Harper, there's a lot to be excited about. Nique Clifford, an older prospect that has a lot of love right now. Very similar numbers, honestly, to Dylan Harper, and played in somewhat of a similar role as a primary creator for Colorado State. Johni Broome, someone who doesn't have a lot of love in the overall draft community. Of course, he's an older prospect, very physically limited in a lot of ways. If you look at size vertical, I'm sure you saw Duolingo's tweet about that. Shot 12 2-pointers a game. Scored a ton, of course, for Auburn, but the efficiency wasn't elite. If you compare him to a Ryan Kalkbrenner, you're going to see a pretty substantive gap in terms of success. Kam Jones had a really good season for Marquette. He'll be featured in a few of these graphs in a big way. Then we get into some of the concern points here. Mark Sears, very bad 2-point season. A big drop-off from where he had a year ago. Chaz Lanier, another guy, I mentioned him in comparison to Koby Brea. If you look at Koby Brea, made over 54% of his twos. Now, didn't shoot a ton of them, only a 2.8 2-point attempts per game. If you go back to the 3-point attempt rate, that was very predictable, right? Koby Brea shot majority of his shots as threes. Lanier shot way more twos per game than Koby Brea, almost 4 more 2-pointers a game, but he was actually pretty significantly less efficient on them, which is one of the reasons I'm quite a bit lower on Chaz Lanier than I am Koby Brea, because I think Brea translates easier to the NBA as a 3-point shooter. Then one of the top 10 picks in this year's draft, Tre Johnson. If you want to have a reason to talk yourself out of Tre Johnson, having superstar upside, having all NBA potential, this right here is the reason why. Shot sub 45% on 2-pointers throughout the course of the entire season. Now, a lot of those, of course, are dribble pull-ups. He shot a lot of mid-range jump shots. But I think the biggest problem with Tre Johnson, and it will be reflected later in his free throw rate as well, is the fact that he does not get to the rim often, and he relies a lot on touch. And that touch, specifically on drives and deeper drives, is his floater. And I know people love floaters. I know people are going to say, well, that's one of the best ways for guards to get their shots off against bigs. I completely disagree. One of the best ways to get your shots off against bigs is going into their chest or playing off of 2 feet with ball fakes. I don't think floaters are an effective, efficient play style. Unless you're one of the premier floater shooters in the world, like a Jalen Brunson, I don't think it's going to be that useful of a tool for him when it comes to building good NBA offense. And Tre Johnson specifically is a guy who was very, very, very reliant on touch. And if we go back to his 3-point attempt rate quick, I know he shot the ball really, really well on threes, and this is where you have substantive offense because you're shooting almost 40% on 3-point attempts. That's almost 1.2 points per possession on his shots. But then you go back to his 2-point volume, and if he's shooting only 45% on twos, that's 0.9 points per possession on shots. That's a very significant drop-off for him. For someone who scored a ton of points per game, as you can see by his bubble size here, there's a lot of volume and not a lot of success. Another guy you should be sounding the alarm on, Liam McNeeley. One of the reasons he has dropped pretty significantly on almost everyone's board. For me, Liam McNeeley is very clearly just a 5th option when he's on the court. He's going to stand in the corner, catch and shoot. He only made 43.6% of his total twos, and he shot over 6 of them a game for UConn. Now, I do think he was a little miscast, a little misused for the Huskies this past year because of some of the deficiencies they had on their overall roster. But Liam McNeeley is very limited as a player. Free throw rate's not going to be super gaudy or impressive ever. His off-the-dribble skills are not good. He's not a great play finisher inside the arc. This is a player who is purely a standstill catch-and-shoot 3-point shooter in the NBA. And one of the biggest reasons I've been fading him in comparison to other shooting prospects like a Koby Brea, who's just vastly more efficient as a 2-point finisher, and even Tre Johnson, who is still, I would say, a pretty significant amount better on twos than McNeeley in terms of both volume and actual efficiency. Those are some of the players I wanted to highlight. Edgecombe, interestingly enough, made about half of his total twos this year. Derik Queen, a guy who I like a lot in this draft, made 56% of his twos. I'm trying to be very thorough here. Asa Newell, one of the biggest selling points for him is his touch. Offensively, made over 62% of his twos. I think this is a very positive number for him moving forward. Who else do I want to mention in here? Kon Knueppel made over 56% of his twos. The volume's not super high, of course. He's a more higher volume 3-point shooter than he is a 2-point shooter, but he is efficient and effective on his twos still. Walter Clayton Jr. scored a ton, obviously, made a decent amount of his twos. I think if you're one of the people who have Walter Clayton above Mark Sears, this is one of your biggest selling points. Why? While Sears had a very disappointing season and Clayton Jr. had his best college season ever, if you look at the multi-year data, though, Mark Sears is probably closer into this conversation than Walter Clayton is, but if you're just going off this most recent year alone, then you're going to have Walter Clayton definitely higher on your board, I'm sure. So let's move down into the defensive numbers. This is block percentage versus steal percentage. So on the vertical axis here, we have block percentage. So the higher up you are, the higher your block percentage was. And then on the x-axis, the horizontal axis here, we have steal percentage. So the further right you are, the more often you were getting in the passing lanes or picking the ball out of the ball handler's pocket, making plays on the basketball, basically. Really, the superior players are going to be up in this top right quadrant if there was any supreme outliers. Now, I do think there are a lot of guys we have to talk about. Also, the size of the bubble here represents total stocks per game, so the bigger the bubble, the more blocks and steals you had on a per game basis. Of course, that is somewhat reliant on minutes as well. And then you also have a little data set here where the red indicates guys who had a higher block percentage than steal percentage, blue indicates a higher steal percentage than block percentage, and purple is the combination of both, where you had the exact same steal and block percentage, which Nique Clifford is the one outlier here in this draft class with a 2% steal rate and a 2% block rate, which is pretty impressive, and had a total of 1.8 stocks per game, so he's pretty productive. Ryan Kalkbrenner, of course, incredible block percentage. Again, if you're one of the analytics guys, you're going to like Ryan Kalkbrenner quite a bit in this draft class. Thomas Sorber, this is where you saw that 7'5", 7'6" wingspan getting put to use all season long for Georgetown. He averaged 3.5 stocks per game, which was incredible. Very impactful defensively for them. His rim defensive field goal percentage numbers were elite, and his block percentage was incredibly gaudy, 7.6% with a 2.7% steal rate. You compare that to someone like Khaman Maluach, a lot more impactful in the passing lanes, and even more impactful as a total shot blocker as well. Now, blocking shots isn't everything when it comes to rim defense, but Sorber has, of course, a ton of value still there in that area. VJ Edgecombe is the biggest outlier in terms of steal percentage, nearly a 4% steal rate, which is just incredible, accompanied with a 2.1% block rate. This is one of the more impressive stocks players in the draft. As a guard, playing in the Big 12 as a true freshman, averaged 2.7 stocks per game. Of course, a majority of those came as steals, where I believe he averaged over 2 steals a game this past year for the Bears. But very impressive defensive stock numbers for sure for Edgecombe. One of the reasons many people believe he has a ton of defensive upside. Adou Thiero, one of my favorite players in this draft, 3.4% steal rate, which is incredible at Arkansas, very, very good, and nearly a 3% block rate as well. He's kind of in that intersection of a player who did both at a very, very high level. Really incredible numbers for him, 1.7 stocks per game. I'm still bummed he missed March Madness, because I thought if he was healthy and with the Razorbacks making a little bit of a deeper run in the tournament than some people expected, he could have really helped his draft stock in a big way. He's still a guy I'm very, very high on. Rasheer Fleming, of course, another player who stands out in this totality here. 2.6% steal rate, 4.9% block rate as a bigger forward with some small ball 5 potential. These are numbers that are going to, of course, paint some real optimism for NBA front offices to consider and look at, with him being, maybe a little bit of a bigger but slightly less athletic Tari Eason. I think that's kind of the comp I've landed on here for Fleming. Less athletic, a little bit taller, a little bit longer. Definitely some really good value as a rotation player in the NBA for sure. Collin Murray-Boyles, the guy who I have high on my board. I know a lot of people are starting to fade him, especially because of the concerns about the shooting, which I totally get. But he's so good in so many other areas that I think he is going to have an impactful NBA career. His block percentage is elite. His steal percentage as a forward, very, very good as well. 2.8 stocks per game, I thought had a really, really good season for himself. Then you get Cooper Flagg. I mean, look at the similarities here between Flagg and Murray-Boyles in terms of steal and block percentage. Very comparable numbers in both of those, and they both averaged 2.8 stocks per game. Murray-Boyles had a very, very good individual season for South Carolina. Cooper Flagg, of course, found more team success playing for a better team for the Duke Blue Devils, but was still very, very good, all things considered. I think one really important piece of data that stands out to me with this data set is the Asa Newell and Derik Queen overlap here. Derik Queen, a 2% steal rate and a 3.8% block rate. Asa Newell, a 2% steal rate and a 3.8% block rate. They have the exact same numbers here, and the only difference, Derik Queen averaged 0.2 stocks per game more than Asa Newell. So very comparable data here, and Asa Newell actually got slightly outperformed by Derik Queen. I know a lot of people really like Asa Newell for some of his defensive versatility and his athletic traits, but then people are also fading Derik Queen because they have questions about his motor and defensive skills, even though he has the exact same numbers as Asa Newell. I think there's a lot of people who are really doubting Derik Queen for biased reasons when it comes to the way his body looks. And, he's a little bit of a bigger boy, right? There are people who worry about how in shape he is. I mean, he was really darn good at basketball for being out of shape. So, I think all things considered, he's going to be a very good player in the NBA. I'd be very shocked if he isn't, honestly. Drake Powell, again, another player who, very interesting here. Let's get into some guys who did not perform well in these measurements. Jeremiah Fear is very active in the steal rate. I mean, this is a guy who, honestly, his numbers weren't bad. I shouldn't have gone to him next. I did want to talk about him, though. But then Mark Sears, basically no block rate, right? He's not going to get blocks. He's tiny. He's 6 foot with shoes on. He has like a 6'2", 6'3" wingspan. Like, standing reach is tiny. He's not going to be a super impactful team defender. At best, he's going to give you solid positioning, which is, one of the biggest issues with him as a prospect. Liam McNeeley, if you're looking for another reason to fade him as a prospect in this draft, unimpactful defensively in terms of creating events. The NBA is translating more and more and more into defensive event creation. You look at the way that Oklahoma City is built as a team defense. Not only do they have a lot of really good point of attack defenders who can stay in front of the basketball, but they have a lot of havoc wreakers as well. Guys who can get in the passing lanes like Alex Caruso. Cason Wallace just flat out rips the ball off of people at times. Like, Liam McNeeley does not fit those traits at all. Koby Brea, he's a sniper shooter. He comes with his own defensive limitations. Actually, a pretty solid block rate, I think, all things considered for him. He does have a negative wingspan, though, and I think that shows up in his steal numbers a bit. Then Will Riley. I think this is one of the most concerning ones of the entire data set here. Just a 0.6% steal rate and a 1% block rate for a 6'8" wing. This is where the lack of application of his physical tools and how slight his frame is. Like, Will Riley does not project to be a good defender at all right now. And I think this is a real concern, a real problem for me. Averaged just over half a stock per game, which is very, very low. I do want to show Ace Bailey some love. Very high block rate. I think there's a lot of functional athletic tools that Bailey has. Coward, remember, very high block rate, but very small sample size. Just 6 games played this past year. So do with that what you will. Let's show Carter Bryant some love as well. His numbers were really incredible. On a per minute basis, basically, when it comes to low usage, lower minute player, but very impactful when he was on the court. Kind of reminiscent to me, honestly, of Adou Thiero's first couple of years at Kentucky. Maybe the numbers are flipped a little bit, higher steal rate for Thiero than what you see for Carter Bryant. But I think all things considered here, obviously very impressive stuff. Let me know throughout the comments too who's standing out to you in all of these graphs. I'm very excited to hear. Let's move on over to rebounding, though, and this is one of my favorite ones to look at. This one's very, very simple. Offensive rebounds on the vertical axis, defensive rebounds per game on the horizontal axis. Of course, this will be heavily influenced by minutes because of their per game stats. But then you have total rebound percentage as the size of the bubble, which is where Khaman Maluach, I know people freak out about the rebounding. I mean, he had an 18% total rebound percentage. You compare that to someone like Thomas Sorber. Maluach, even though he averaged less rebounds per game overall, was actually incredibly impactful. And I think one of the biggest things for him, you look at his offensive rebounds per game, almost 3 offensive rebounds per game in just about 20 plus minutes. Very, very, very good on the offensive glass. That's where his size, screen setting, rolling, playing out of the dunker is going to be really valuable for a team. He got on the glass a ton. I know that final game against Houston kind of left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth. I would not be worried about it at all, talking about Khaman Maluach. Asa Newell for me, I've talked at length about Newell's ability to get on the offensive glass. 3.3 offensive rebounds per game. The concern for me, if you look at his total rebound percentage compared to Maluach, that smaller bubble size, he just had more opportunities because of minutes and misses and being in proximity to the rim more frequently at times than Maluach was because of where Maluach would play out of Duke's offense. Newell had more rebounding opportunities and really didn't come away with a lot more than Maluach did. So Asa Newell, even though I've talked at length about his offensive rebounding, I do think, it's, while the raw numbers look incredible, the actual rebound rate gives us, I think, a better picture. Johni Broome, if you're trying to talk yourself into it, this is where, look at how much he stands out on this graph compared to everybody else. He is in the way upper right quadrant. Really high volume. Of course, he was such a high volume usage player, high volume player in general for Auburn. But this guy could rebound the ball. Over 7 rebounds a game defensively, almost 4 offensive rebounds per game with an incredible 20.2% total rebound percentage. If you are someone who believes Johni Broome can bring actual substantive value in the second round, this is one of the graphs you want to use and look at and say this is the reason why, because this is a very, very promising graph for him when you compare him to the other college basketball prospects. For those who are wondering too, the reason I don't have the international prospects on these graphs, I just think it's not really fair to compare them from an analytical data standpoint. They're playing against professionals compared to college kids. I just think it's a different league, different kind of world to be discussing them in, so I didn't want to include their data compared to college prospects. Maxime Raynaud, very solid rebounding numbers, I think all things considered. Nique Clifford, extremely active on the glass, over 8 defensive rebounds per game. Got on the glass offensively quite a bit too. Derik Queen, very solid rebounding numbers. In fact, a better total rebound percentage than Ryan Kalkbrenner. Got on the offensive glass a good deal. Of course, stickbacks are a big part of his offensive game. Very coordinated, talented in that realm. And then got on the defensive glass quite well too. Danny Wolf, really solid numbers. Grant Nelson at 6'10", I think is an underrated player to talk about. He might not even get drafted. I think he's definitely someone who could stick in the NBA for a while, though. It's going to take a couple years for him to really uncover his game. But there's physical tools there. There's really good length and size for his position. And with a shooting doctor, a shooting coach, I think you could probably change and increase his efficiency as a shooter in general. Adou Thiero, another guy who stands out to me as a go-and-get-it type of player. Like, this is a guy, almost 2 offensive rebounds per game. I think very undervalued in that realm. Ace Bailey was around the rim a lot. Now, his total rebound percentage isn't as great as you would hope it to be. Comparing him to someone like CMB or Sorber or Kalkbrenner or Rasheer Fleming. There's guys who rebounded the ball better from an efficiency standpoint necessarily than Bailey. But Bailey's volume was very good. Over 5 defensive rebounds a game. Over 2 offensive rebounds per game. I think this is a good number that paints his overall effort levels, getting on the glass, getting involved in the picture. Edgecombe, really applicable offensive rebounding as well. That's where you see some more of that application of his athleticism. When you get down into this bottom quadrant, McNeeley rebounded the ball really well defensively. This is one of your selling points for McNeeley. Flagg was a great rebounder. I mean, you guys know Flagg's pretty much good at everything, so it's not really shocking. Then you look at like some guys who are concerning. Tre Johnson, very low rebound rate. In fact, a lower rebound rate than Koby Brea even, who had a negative wingspan. Tre Johnson, very good athlete, didn't apply that athleticism a lot, and I think that's one of the concerns for me. Egor Demin's huge, 6'9" player, doesn't rebound the ball at all. Kam Jones had basically better rebounding numbers than Egor Demin. In fact, well, at least very comparable to Egor, who had very low offensive rebound rate, especially. Jase Richardson, small player, right? Like Mark Sears, this is again another one of those limitations. He just does not rebound the ball very well. So, I mean, like you're looking at guards here, so you might be saying, well, why does it matter? I mean, it's a possession sport. It's a possession game. Carter Bryant didn't rebound the ball very well. But again, this is a per game basis. So for him playing less minutes, like the rebounding rate's actually pretty solid there with 11.9% rebound percentage. One guy who I do want to talk about, Jakucionis. This is an active guy. Gets on the glass. Very good per game numbers for a guard. And then you look at the total rebounding percentage, kind of being in that 10% range. He did outclass some of these other guards in here. Just looking at Lanier, Clayton Jr. Like, one of the things I like about Jakucionis, he's just very active. He knows what he's doing. Very high IQ player. He gets after it when he's on the court. Let's move down to one of the more interesting graphs in this entire video, in my opinion, and that is free throw rate versus free throw percentage. And the size of the bubble represents free throw attempts per game. So bigger bubbles means that guy got to the line a ton on a per game basis. Of course, again, that's somewhat dictated, by minutes. But then free throw rate is not dictated by minutes. Your free throw rate is how many free throws basically you shoot per shot. So, if you shoot 10 shots a game and you shoot 6 free throws, you're going to have a 60% free throw rate, which is quite good. So you look at someone like Adou Thiero. I mean, look at his free throw rate. This guy is the vertical outlier here. Very, very high free throw rate. If you want to look at, there's a few ways to look at free throw rate as a positive. It's either the guy has a handle and a skill set that puts defenders out of position to foul him, or he's so athletic that he blows by guys, gets to the rim, gets to the rack, and is going to draw fouls on drives, cuts, slashing opportunities, and just puts opponents at an athletic disadvantage. I think for Adou Thiero specifically, that athletic disposition is what really stands out here on the free throw rate. His free throw rate was almost 70%, which is just unbelievable. Shot over 6 free throws a game as not even a primary ball handler. I think this is one of the reasons I'm high on Thiero. He's arguably the best athlete in this class, got to the line a ton. He didn't make a ton of them. Sub 70% free throw shooter. I think, the shooting indicators are not good for Adou Thiero going into his NBA career. But with the right development and the right application of his tools, with the right coaching, he could be a very, very, very good player very quickly in his career. One of the big reasons I'm super high on Derik Queen, not only does he have some positive shooting indicators, made almost 77% of his free throws this past year, but his free throw rate was unbelievable. 54.6% free throw rate, shot 6 free throws a game for Maryland as their go-to offensive player. This is a guy who, unlike Thiero, wins with his skill set more instead of just putting guys at an athletic disposition. Well, one, he's big, bulky, can play into contact, which does help him in this too, but he has a very unique set of gathers, likes playing out of the middle of the floor. He's good against reaches, good against contact. Derik Queen, just a very, very good player. Collin Murray-Boyles, very similar free throw rate. Now, not quite as efficient on actually capitalizing on those free throws, about 6% less efficient than Queen on free throws, but Collin Murray-Boyles and Derik Queen have a lot of actual statistical, analytical similarities between them. Queen, of course, is about 3 inches taller than Murray-Boyles, and I think just a more skilled with the ball in his hands player than CMB, but CMB, of course, I think has more defensive versatility than what Queen's going to offer in the NBA. Again, here's some more Sion James love. 81% of his free throws were connected on this year, 46% free throw rate. Very, very good stuff. Kon Knueppel, one of the horizontal outliers here, made over 91% of his free throws. I don't think that's the most shocking thing to anybody, but I think it just kind of solidifies his value as a shooter. Koby Brea also made 91% of his free throws. Much lower free throw rate, though, and I think this is one of the things, if you're asking, okay, well, many times, Sheldon, you've said Koby Brea is the best shooter in this draft. Why is he not higher than Kon Knueppel? Well, it's because he doesn't get to the line. Kon Knueppel isn't as talented as a shooter from three as Koby Brea, but Kon Knueppel is a much better all-around player, and I think that's one of the big separation points, and I think this graph does a very, very good job in showcasing that. Even though Knueppel's awesome, Koby Brea's higher three-point attempt rate and less pressure he puts on the rim, less driving capabilities, less ball screen talent. Like, this is what's going to limit Koby Brea as an offensive player in the NBA in comparison to Kon Knueppel. Tre Johnson, Walter Clayton Jr., both of them very similar free throw rates. Again, you're seeing the difference here, and one of the concerns I have about Tre Johnson, he has a 7, almost 8% lower free throw rate than Kon Knueppel. That is another kind of right concern for me when it comes to his reliance on touch, which I mentioned earlier. Chaz Lanier, another player, low free throw rate. Now, he did shoot more twos than Koby Brea. Again, I talked about that. It's a difference between those guys. Now, Lanier was less efficient on those twos than Brea, but he does get to the line a little bit more. Derik Powell, I mean, this is, again, low usage. Didn't make a lot of his free throws. I'm not really worried. He only shot 1.5 a game. It's very small sample size, all things considered. If you are someone who is fading Ace Bailey in this draft, this is a graph that's going to stand out for you in a big way. Only 24% free throw rate. Very, very low. I think all things considered, you look at the other players in this kind of realm. Drake Powell, Tyrese Proctor, Egor Demin, who's afraid of contact. Rasheer Fleming had a higher free throw rate than Bailey. Like, you know, he's in the same kind of ballpark as players who aren't going to be stars in the league at all offensively. Like, Drake Powell does not have offensive star potential. I don't think Egor Demin does. I don't think Tyrese Proctor does. Like, these players in this lower free throw rate are concerning. And Ace Bailey is someone who doesn't put pressure on the rim. His handle's not elite. And the scary thing is, Ace Bailey's a very good athlete and still didn't get to the line a ton. And I think that points to some of his skill set issues and also his play style problems that will hopefully get corrected pretty early into his NBA career. Sorber, pretty good free throw rate, 42%, very solid there. Cooper Flagg, 43% free throw rate essentially. Liam McNeeley actually had a very, very good free throw rate. I think this is one of the things that, you know, the 2-point percentage was awful, but he did get to the line a good amount, which kind of saves his efficiency. Mark Sears, if you're looking for some more Mark Sears love, you know, we pointed to some of his negatives in the block percentage, the rebounding stuff, but this guy can get to the line. Very high volume ball handler, got to the line a ton for Alabama. 48% free throw rate on a high volume ball handler is very, very, very good. Jakucionis got to the line a lot, almost a 50% free throw rate, one of the biggest things that's keeping him in the top 10 for me. I think this number here kind of justifies a lot of what I've been seeing with him. Jeremiah Fears, elite free throw rate. This is, again, I think a byproduct of his handle. Johni Broome had a pretty good free throw rate, now didn't make a ton of them. And Danny Wolf, I think this is one of the concern points for me. Got to the line a good amount, but just didn't make a lot of his free throws. So, you know, I think this data is interesting to look at. Now, again, is any one of these charts going to give you everything you need to know about a player? Definitely not. A quick reminder that this is in supplication with actual film study, right? Like, this is not just, oh, I looked at these graphs and think I know everything. It's, first of all, I made these graphs, and, you know, there are certain things I wanted to see visualized in these graphs, but these graphs don't tell you everything you need to know. So I'd say keep that in mind. Now we're going to go into kind of ball handling and decision making, turnover percentage on the x-axis, or on the y-axis, assist percentage on the x-axis, and the size of the bubble represents assist to turnover rate, which is kind of a way to restate the turnover and assist percentage. Now, assists per game and turnovers per game are not the same as the assist and turnover rate, but they are somewhat similar. So, you know, I think it just kind of stands out in a big way. Like, Kam Jones was the big outlier this year. Look at his gaudy assist percentage. He had the outlier assist percentage among the class, and a very low turnover rate. It's something about Marquette's offense. Tyler Kolek had very, very good playmaking numbers last year. Then he gets drafted by New York and basically had zero role for the Knicks under Tom Thibodeau. Now, that's not really, a slight at Kolek. Thibodeau doesn't play rookies very much, so not trying to take a shot there. But, Kam Jones, very good numbers. Is this someone, though, that you're going to put the ball in his hands a ton in the NBA? Maybe, maybe not. This is backup point guard quality stuff here, though. So definitely a name to watch. Egor Demin's the really interesting one. He's extremely high up on this list with a near 22% turnover rate, but an incredible almost 35% assist rate. So very, very high volume, high leverage passer where he's going to make risky passes, but a lot of those risky passes will turn into good assist opportunities. So Egor Demin, I think one of the more polarizing players in this draft. I'm not very high on him myself because I think there's functional problems with his handle and three-point shot at this point. But if you are buying stock on him, and for me, I'm not fully out on him, and it's because his passing skill is very, very good. Jakucionis had a very similar turnover rate, but I thought was tasked to do a little bit more and was, I think put in a spot where he had to create so much offense, and I thought he played better against good competition than Egor, which is why I'm still higher on Jakucionis than Egor. But I think, this is one of those red flag numbers a little bit for Jakucionis. He still had a positive assist to turnover rate, but he did just flat out turn the ball over a little too much in college. Cooper Flagg, it's kind of funny to see him and Dylan Harper so close in a lot of these numbers. Flagg and Harper, very similar stuff. One thing I do need to go back and talk about here, back on the 2-point percentage stuff, Ace Bailey and Flagg had almost the exact same 2-point percentage, by the way, on very similar volume. Both of them essentially shot 10 2-pointers a game and made almost identical numbers. So if you're and this is the thing, I think that's a red flag for Cooper Flagg, to be honest. That's hey, his handle needs to get better. But all in all, his decision-making throughout the course of the season was still really good. If you compare him to Ace Bailey in this realm, Ace Bailey actually had a negative assist-to-turnover rate. Negative assist-to-turnover rate. He should be red bubble here. I think I messed that up in my data. But, he had a 0.65 assist-to-turnover rate, which is quite bad, all things considered. Kalkbrenner was flat 1-to-1 assist-to-turnover rate. Koby Brea, very low assist percentage because a majority of his role is catch and shoot, play off the catch, movement shooting, but he is very turnover averse. A 2.6 assist to turnover rate. Now, a lot of that again is because he's just catching and shooting the basketball, but that's it's a little positive. If you have movement shooting in your offense, you're probably going to turn the ball over just a little bit less. Maluach, kind of an alarming turnover rate, a little bit over 11.5%. Assist rate's really low. This is flat out, he's a play finisher. He's not going to, especially on day one of his career, be this super connective, short roll, make reads. That's something you're hoping by year 3 of his career he's taken pretty significant strides in. Derik Queen, I do think his turnover rate is a little inflated because of college travel calls. Once he gets to the NBA, he's not going to get called for travels on his spin moves nearly as much. It's just not going to happen. So I'm not worried about that. And I think with better talent around him, I just think Maryland was pretty talent-stricken. They had some good players, Gillespie and Reese, but they just really weren't that good. So I don't know. I'm trying not to be too overly positive on Derik Queen. These are some concerns, but I think when you actually watch the film, yes, the assisted turnover rate doesn't look good for him, but I think it's a way different story than Ace Bailey's, who has a significantly lower assist percentage than Queen, and honestly pretty similar talent around them when you factor in the fact that Ace Bailey had Dylan Harper and Derik Queen doesn't have another NBA player on his roster. Kon Knueppel, really good numbers. Jase Richardson, really great assist to turnover rate. He is very ball secure, very safe with the basketball. Collin Murray-Boyles, high assist percentage for a forward. Jeremiah Fears, another guy, really, really good assist percentage. Kind of inflated turnover rate because of how much he had the ball in his hands. Again, I wouldn't overly worry about that too much. Mark Sears, this is another thing. He took a huge playmaking stride his final season in college basketball. And if you're a Nique Clifford believer, here's another number in the analytics that really help you. Again, I would urge a little bit of caution for the very old prospects, the guys in their, almost mid-20s at this point. Nique Clifford's an older prospect in this draft, but you'd expect him to be better against college athletes, but still really good numbers. So, don't want to undersell that at all either. Let's get into scoring volume versus efficiency, and the size of the bubble represents usage. If your usage was less than 20%, you're in a red bubble. If your usage was between 20 and 25%, you're a yellow bubble. If your usage was 25 to 30%, you're a green bubble. And if your usage was greater than 30%, you are a blue bubble. So that's kind of the little bit of background here for this graph specifically. We'll zoom out a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. But you know, the guys that stand out to me, first of all, let's talk about the low usage players like Carter Bryant. I mean, very low usage, 16.4% usage rate, but he was very efficient, 59%. So the higher up you are, the more efficient you were on your total shots. But he didn't score a ton. The further left you are, the less points you scored. The further right, the more points you scored. Khaman Maluach, extremely efficient. Again, 73.6% true shooting this year on a low usage, 16.1% usage rate. Sion James, low usage player. This is exactly what he's going to be in the NBA. This is what kind of backs up more of my Terrence Mann comp for him. Low usage player, but effective as a play finisher when he actually decided to shoot the ball. Drake Powell, fairly efficient, but actually the lowest usage rate player on this entire pool. Just 13.8% usage, which is incredibly low. Koby Brea, again, a lot of his shots are three-pointers. Gives him a little bit of a boost in the true shooting percentage when he makes a lot of them, but his usage was still incredibly low. Rasheer Fleming, very solid usage rate. He's actually, he should be a yellow bubble, so kind of avoid that. That should be a yellow bubble there. Egor Demin, I mean, you know, 51% true shooting. Like, do I need to really say more? He wasn't efficient at all. And that's not shocking because he couldn't get to the rim consistently. Over half of his shots were threes, like we mentioned earlier. Will Riley, I mean, not very efficient. Similar kind of ballpark to Ace Bailey efficiency-wise, but Ace Bailey was a significantly higher usage player and then also scored more points per game as a result of that. Kam Jones, pretty efficient. Again, if you're one of the people looking at the outliers, though, Ryan Kalkbrenner, told you he was going to stand out in a lot of these graphs. Here he is, 68.4% true shooting. Of course, he was so dominant at the rim like we talked about earlier. And, you know, a solid usage rate, 23.6%. That would probably scale down a little bit more in the NBA, playing off of more guys and just being less central to an offense than he was for Creighton. Cedric Coward, again, 6-game sample size, you got to be careful, but 70% true shooting for him in those 6 games. He just couldn't miss on twos. He was extremely effective on two-pointers, and he was also shooting the ball really, really well on threes. Derik Queen, high usage rate, almost 27%, very efficient, 59%. If you get to the line a lot, your true shooting percentage is going to be helped quite a bit. That's where you see Dylan Harper, 58.7% true shooting percentage, very good there with a high usage rate, 29%. Cooper Flagg at 31% usage rate, 19.2 points per game. Nique Clifford, another stat that loves him. Mark Sears, even though he had an inefficient season shooting the ball from three, wasn't as great as he was a year ago. His 2-point efficiency really dipped. The fact that he gets to the free throw line a ton makes him still an impactful player. 27% usage rate this season, almost 57% true shooting, even when he had a down year. So, I know a lot of people are fading Mark Sears, and I understand, the physical limitations, all that. Guy's good at basketball. So, take that as you will. Kam Jones, pretty solid season for him as well, 55% true shooting. But this is what I was talking about. Like, Sears in a down year was still a more overall effective shooter if you're using true shooting percentage to justify that. And it's because he gets to the line way more than Kam Jones does. Collin Murray-Boyles, like, again, if you're a stat person, Collin Murray-Boyles is going to be a lot higher on your board if you're a stat guy than if you're a film guy. Well, that's not even necessarily true. Let me take that back. If you're a theory guy. If you're a theory person, you're going to have Collin Murray-Boyles very low, probably, because you're going to say he can't shoot, and those limitations are definitely something that you should consider no matter how you're evaluating prospects. But if you're a film guy, you're going to come away and say there's definitely some value for CMB to play into in the league. And if you're an analytics guy, you're probably going to have him in the top 3 or 4 on your board because he's extremely impactful in pretty much every analytic this year. Jakucionis, very good true shooting. Edgecombe, more of a developmental prospect, wasn't as efficient as a scorer this year as some other players. Sorber, pretty respectable true shooting, but again, you're kind of seeing the difference between him and Queen in terms of usage and volume and all of that. And then Sorber's also coming off of a foot injury and measured in pretty heavy at the combine, I believe over 10 pounds heavier than Derik Queen even. Proctor, Grant Nelson, both somewhat efficient. I haven't talked about Proctor probably enough in this video. Had a very good season, kind of adjusting and shifting his role to playing more off the basketball. So we'll see how a team values that. Kon Knueppel, look at his true shooting here, very high on the graph. Again, you want to be higher on the graph, and the further right and higher you are, the better, which is why Kalkbrenner and Coward are, definite risers at the end of this process here, because their numbers are just elite. And Kalkbrenner measured in very well at over 7'1" without shoes on at the combine, which is good. But Knueppel was just awesome all season long for Duke, and is a really, really safe pick. Kon Knueppel is going to be a playoff player for sure. He's just good. Moving on here down to age versus net rating. So we have just a couple graphs left, and I think this is one that is pretty interesting to talk about because it's comparing your impact essentially for your team in relation to your age, and then the size of the bubble represents minutes per game. So if you played a lot of minutes, your bubble's bigger. If you didn't play a ton of minutes, your bubble's smaller. Khaman Maluach only played 21.2 minutes per game this past year for Duke, but look at how much of an outlier he is. There is no player in this draft class from college that I have included here with over a 40 net rating. Khaman Maluach had a 53.0 net rating. 53.0. Look at how much of an outlier he is. This is ridiculous. This is just honestly ridiculous stuff, and he's only 18.7 years old at the time of the draft. So he's still incredibly young. This is by far and away the most impactful young player in the draft, and honestly just the most impactful player in the draft period when you look at the net rating. Now, net rating, again, is not the best way to actually measure that, but this is over the course of 39 games that he played. So this isn't just small sample size. It's smaller because he only played 21 minutes a game, but you compare his net rating to Cooper Flagg, Duke was way better with Maluach on the floor even than they were with Flagg. Now, Flagg is the better player. Like, again, this is where you can't look at net rating and base your entire board off of it, because Maluach is not better than Cooper Flagg at basketball. It's just not. There's no way to come away with that conclusion. But Maluach is still very impactful, and this is, I think, a testament to his rim presence, his offensive rebounding, his screen setting. He actually had 146 offensive rating, which is just ridiculous. If we go back up here to the top, Maluach is the very top player on here. We'll scroll over his 147.3 offensive rating for Khaman Maluach, which is just ridiculous. Remember, he measured in at about 7'1" without shoes on, a near 7'7" wingspan. This is an elite prospect. Like, he's really, really good. Right now, he's fourth on my big board. I might move him up to third. I'm like kind of between him and Derik Queen for that spot. I like Maluach a lot, and this is like one of the graphs. If you're a Maluach believer, you should be like putting in your Twitter banner, because this is like ridiculous. Kon Knueppel, I mean, so the age here is sorted, by the way. So, like the red is guys who are 19 to 20 years old. Blue is 20 to 21. So hopefully this graph is, this should be very easy to read. Draft age on the bottom, net rating going upward. The higher up you are, the better. There are a couple negatives. Ace Bailey, negative 0.9 net rating. If you compare that to Dylan Harper, who is right here, he actually had a +8 net rating. So, people, I see this comment a lot. Why do people blame Ace Bailey for Rutgers' bad season more than they do Dylan Harper? It's because Rutgers was less bad with Dylan Harper on the court. When Dylan Harper was on the floor, Rutgers outscored their opponents by 8 points per 100 possessions. When Ace Bailey was on the court, they got outscored by 1 point per 100 possessions. So that's a pretty substantive difference. A difference of 9 net rating is pretty substantive, all things considered. And Egor Demin was terrible in college basketball. BYU got outscored by almost 2 points per 100 possessions when he was on the court, and he played over 27 minutes per game. So, he just wasn't that good when it actually came down to, like, winning, just to be completely honest. Mark Sears, only a 7.1 net rating this year. I think this is kind of a testament to some of the limitations Alabama had defensively. Mark Sears' offensive rating was quite good, but they just couldn't get stops. And Mark Sears was part of that problem, but they had other issues as well in that overall team context. Walter Clayton Jr. had a very good net rating, 22. Koby Brea was good. Maxime Raynaud, a little bit less impactful. Sion James, again, more Sion James stock here. 34.3 net rating. Pretty much all of the Duke guys, you're looking at really high net ratings. Knueppel, James, Flagg. If we can find Tyrese Proctor in here, too. He had a 22.5 net rating, which actually isn't quite as good as you would maybe expect it to be. But then again, Maluach is that extreme outlier, like 53 net. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how important this is. This video is probably going to be an hour long. Khaman Maluach should be about 30 minutes of it just talking about how ridiculous this is, because it's honestly absurd. This is, I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this. He is 17 points per 100 possessions better almost than Cooper Flagg was for Duke this year, which is just insane. It's a testament to his rim size and gravity, deterrence, and screen setting in a big way. I'm not going to spend enough time on it, and I've already lectured you about it for a minute or two already because it's that important. Like, a lot of these other guys are kind of in that same realm, like smaller net ratings, like Tre Johnson didn't have a good team around him at Texas. I'm not going to worry. Like, net rating is not the most important thing to consider, so, even Ace Bailey, Egor Demin, who had bad college seasons, like, this isn't going to completely destroy their NBA careers. It is just, kind of a sign of where they currently are at as prospects in terms of their talent. Jeremiah Fears, just barely above, or just barely below, a 1 net rating, 0.7 net rating for Oklahoma. I think this is a pretty different context, though. Fears playing for Oklahoma as the primary initiator of everything. I thought he handled it pretty well for his draft age at 18.6 years old. So Flagg is the youngest prospect in this grouping as well, by the way, 18.5 years old. I'm sure most of you already knew that, though, because he reclassed. And then we'll get into offensive rating versus defensive rating, and then the size of the bubble represents net rating. Again, Maluach is the big outlier, 53 net rating. But look at his offensive rating again. Like, this is absurd stuff. No one else is above, 135 is Cedric Coward, and he had a small sample size of 6 games to begin the year. Look at Maluach, man. 147.3, and his defensive rating is insane. If you want to know why Cooper Flagg's so great, when he was on the court, Duke only gave up 89.5 points per 100 possessions, which is way better than almost everybody else. It's funny, I hear all the time about how Derik Queen is such a terrible defensive prospect. Second best defensive rating among all of these players. Of course, I think one of the reasons for that, Maryland was playing 2 bigs. They had other rim protection around him. But for those saying, well, he's a tweener big, and what position is he? Playing him at the 4 doesn't look so bad when it comes to the actual numbers now, does it? 25 net rating. Very, very good on the season for him. Danny Wolf played with 2 bigs. Defensive rating was quite good. The offensive rating was significantly worse, though, than Derik Queen. Offensive rating, of course, the vertical axis. Defensive rating, the horizontal axis. You don't want to be further right. And Koby Brea, Mark Sears, 2 guys who I do like in this draft still, bled a little bit defensively, and I don't think that's the most shocking thing to anybody. This is, some of the limiting factors for them as prospects, which is why they're not in the top 20 on my board this year. Even though they're both very skilled players, neither of them come with real defensive stopper ability at all. And the further left you are, the better defender you had, the more impact defensively you presumably had for your team, or the better team defense you were a part of course. And then higher up you are, the more offensive impact you had. Maluach was one of the most impactful offensive prospects we've ever seen. Honestly, this offensive rating is ridiculous. Again, no one's talked about it, but this is absurdly insane. Grant Nelson, you see how bunched a lot of this is. There's guys in this realm who, this is your standard draft realm. Ace Bailey, Egor Demin both have the negative net ratings. We've already talked about that. I don't think there's too much that you can gather from this and say, oh, well, this defines who a prospect is. But I think it's a good visualization, all things considered, on, how the prospects shaped out this year in terms of some of their advanced numbers. I really hope you guys did enjoy the visualization of these graphs. It was a lot of fun to talk about. Of course, I put a lot of time and effort into not only collecting all the data for that, but then putting the actual graphs together and everything. So I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more NBA draft content. Let me know what you thought about the visualizations down in the comment section below. And we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.